Good evening. Thanks for joining us for the May 28th POSAC Open Space Advisory Committee meeting. We'll start with a call to order, which will be the roll call. Scott Miller.
Present.
Ann Oberchain.
Present.
Heather Williams.
Present.
Jen Archuleta.
Present.
Paula Fitzgerald.
Here.
Trace Baker.
Here.
Kara Pasquisi.
Present.
Stephen Merrick.
Here.
Jim Krug, present. The first item of business is approval of the May 23rd meeting. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second,
Scott Miller, I second.
any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Abstentions? Let the record show the motion's passed. At this time, we're going to ask to move into executive session. I move that POSAC enter into executive session in accordance with CRS 24-6-402 4A for the purpose of discussing the purchase of the sale of real estate relating to the Canino 7M Ranch. For those listening in, the public, we will go into a break room till about the targeted time is 7 o'clock, and we will come back hopefully out of executive session estimated at 7 a.m. I'm sorry, 7 p.m. Let's try 7 p.m. So the chair will entertain a motion to go into executive session.
This is Trace Baker. I move that POSAC enter executive session.
Jen Archuleta, second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. We will now move into executive session and into the break room. The agenda is the Canino 7M Ranch acquisition, and we have Mel presenting tonight. Mel, thanks for coming out. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jim. This is Mel Stonebreaker, Parks and Open Space staff. Tonight, we are proposing that the county acquire the fee title in 236 acres of the Canino 7M Ranch property and associated water rights, which are owned by Clyde and Jan Canino. The property is located at the northwest corner of Highway 52. Hold on a minute. I'm sorry, I'm having an issue here, though. Thank you very much. I didn't realize I was turned off. I beg your pardon. So the property is located at the northwest corner of Highway 52 and East County Line Road. The county may grant a conservation easement interest over these 236 acres to Colorado Parks and Wildlife. It is also proposed that the county create a lot of approximately 23 acres around the ranch complex, which would be retained by the sellers. So in February 2001, the county acquired a conservation easement interest over the Canino 7M Ranch property. On April 15th, 2020, the county acquired the fee title and approximately 84 acres of that ranch. Staff is now proposing that the county acquire the fee title to the approximately 236 acres of the remaining property. This portion of the Canino 7M Ranch property contains more than a third of a mile of Boulder Creek, as well as 25 acres of open ponds and associated marshlands. The county will also create a legal parcel of approximately 23 acres to be retained by the seller. The retained parcel would contain all of the improvements on the ranch property, including a 3,000 square foot residence, a mobile home, and numerous outbuildings. This ranch complex parcel would be subject to a conservation easement that would allow a single family residence, one accessory dwelling, and agricultural uses. So the terms of the deal would be as follows. It is proposed that the county pay $2,852,852 for 236 acres and associated water rights. Some of those water rights are 93 shares of the Boulder and White Rock Ditch Company, a 50% interest in 10 units of the Northern Colorado Water Conservation District, The Becky Reservoir System, which there are 2 reservoirs on the property, and these water rights are associated with those reservoirs. The larger one is 132 acre-feet of water. That's reservoir number 1, and the smaller one, reservoir number 2, is 88 acre-feet of water. The Becky Seepage, which is 2 CFS of water, and the Archuleta Well, which is 160 acre-feet. So,
Hey Mel,
go
I'm sorry,
ahead.
this is Janice. Would you mind throwing up your slides so we can see a map?
Yes, I
Get
will do
started
that.
with that. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to do that in a moment, but I'll do it now. If it'll open, there we go. Yes, is that working?
Yes, thanks.
Thanks. So we value that collection of water rights at about $860,000, and so the land value equals out to about $8,000 an acre. The purchase would include the mineral rights under the 236 acres and under the 23-acre ranch complex, the lot that's going to be retained by the seller. The seller would retain any oil and gas royalties for 25 years. Now, the county will carry out a division of land to create the retained parcel. And the retained parcel, as I've said, would be subject to a conservation easement that will restrict the property to agricultural and single-family residential uses with 1 accessory dwelling unit and with the residence restricted to 5,000 square feet and the outbuildings to 25,000 square feet. So let me show you some pictures of what we're talking about here. Seems like, oh, now it's not going to work for me. Gosh darn it. It's not scrolling for some reason. Let me, I don't know how to get on. Let me try this again. I beg your pardon. Yeah, let's try this. Let's see if this, okay, here we go. Sorry about that. So as you can see, this is looking kind of from the middle of the property toward the south, and you can just barely see Highway 52 in the distance there. Kind of from the same spot, looking more to the southeast, and that large reservoir in front of you is reservoir number 1, which is the larger of the 2, obviously. This is looking west, kind of from the middle of the property. So reservoir number 1, the larger of the 2, this is an outlet from that reservoir that delivers water back to Boulder Creek. You can see it there. This is the smaller of the 2 reservoirs. There are marshlands around both of these reservoirs, kind of between them and also a little bit to the east. This is looking west from kind of the eastern edge of the property. So it goes all the way past the cattle. You can see there, you can see some of the outbuildings there, just beyond the cattle. It goes all the way up to the top of the hill beyond the outbuildings. And west of that is the reservoir, Panama Reservoir. This is Boulder Creek, and it runs along the eastern part of the property. And this is from the middle of the property again, looking west, kind of from the center of the property. And when I went to take these pictures, 6 horses decided to come join me, and I thought I had gotten them out of my picture, but I didn't quite make it. So that's what the property looks like, and I'll finish up my memo here, if that's all right. So under the Boulder County Comprehensive Plan, 216 acres are designated as prime farmland, and 20 acres are designated as farmland of state and local importance. The ranch property is part of the Panama Reservoir Critical Wildlife Habitat Area, as well as the East County Environmental Conservation Easement Area, Conservation Area. The part of the property that borders Boulder Creek is designated as wetland and riparian area, and the entire property is included as a high priority for view protection corridor. At this time, the property, as you can see, is used to grow hay and to pasture cattle and horses. The property would be closed to public use due to the agricultural lease, unless Parks and Open Space later determines other closures or open space uses are appropriate. So staff recommends that the county acquire the 236 acres and associated water rights and create a 23-acre ranch complex parcel subject to a conservation easement. All as described above. Staff also recommends approval to grant a conservation easement interest in and over the 236 acres to Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Both actions will accomplish important county goals to protect the property as county open space. So I'm asking you to make a recommendation to the Boulder County Commissioners for approval of the acquisition of the Canino 7M Ranch property as described above. And so that's that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. Let's take a few questions. So Ann, this time I'll start with you, please.
Hi, thanks, Jim. Hi, Mel. I just had one
Hi.
quick clarifying question. Are the oil and gas rights that are being retained for the entire property or just the 23 acres that the seller is maintaining?
Well, the county would acquire the mineral rights, but the oil and gas royalties would be for the entire
I'm sorry,
property.
royalties.
Yeah, the royalties would be for the entire property. And there are several operating wells on the property at the moment. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Heather?
No questions at this time.
Jen? Jen, any questions?
Sure. Yeah, I'm gonna get right back to you. I'm just sort of reviewing something real quick.
Okay. Paula?
No questions.
Trace?
Yeah, Trace Baker here. Thank you, Mel. I've got three things I want to bring up, and I think mostly to help me understand the legal language involved. When you write that you allow a single family residence, one accessory dwelling unit, does that apply to the existing structures on the property, or will that allow new structures?
Right now it applies to existing structures, but so there is a house on the property now, and there is a trailer which is a non-conforming, but it's an accessory dwelling. At some point in the future, they could build a new house, but they'd have to remove the house that's there. They could remodel the house that's there. They could expand it somewhat. But they couldn't build two houses there. They have a right for one single family residence. And it's the same with the trailer. At this point, it's allowed to continue to be used. If they were to stop using it, they would not be able to come back and try to recreate that right. But the right exists, and they're allowed to continue using that trailer.
Okay, thank you. And you, along the way, answered my second question. So the third one, for the sentence beginning, seller will retain oil and gas royalties. And you mentioned that there is current oil and gas activity on the property. So does the county acquire any environmental or financial risk because of the existence of this activity?
No, I would say no to both those questions. There's no particular environmental or financial risk to the county. As you know, we own a lot of open space that has oil and gas operations on it. This would be no different than those. And there's no particular risk to the county financially. There's a kind of an environmental risk that we wish we could stop, but there's not much we can do about that. I mean, the leases are there. The leases pre-exist. I mean, they go back into the 1970s. So these are not something we can do much about at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Mel.
Thanks, Trace. Kira?
No questions.
Stephen?
Yeah, I'm curious about the 50% interest in the Big T water, how that evolved. If you can clarify that.
Yeah, the county owns a 50% interest in that Big T water already as part of our conservation easement acquisition back in 2001. So as it stands today, we own 50% of that Big T water, and the Caninos own the other 50%. So as part of this acquisition, the county will acquire the Caninos' 50% interest. And so when it's done, the county will own 100% of those 10 units of Big T.
All right. That answered my question. Thank you.
Thanks. Scott Miller?
No questions.
And Jen, I'll come back to you. Did you have your?
Oh, no, he answered my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask Ms. V, is there any online public comments or questions?
Sorry, we have no public comment for this one.
Thank you. At this time, then, the chair will entertain a motion.
This is Paula Fitzgerald. I'll recommend to the Boulder County Commissioners approval of the acquisition of the Canino 7M Ranch as described by staff.
Jen Archuleta, second.
Any discussion? This time we'll move to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, like sign. Abstentions? Let the record show the motion is passed. Thank you, Mel.
Thank you, folks. I appreciate it.
Next item of business is a CenturyLink acquisition. And Janice, I think you're going to be presenting.
That's right. Good evening, Janice Wisman, Real Estate Division Manager. And as some of you have noted, we've also invited Justin Spring from the Conservation Fund, who is online as well, to answer questions and help me with this, if there are any. Hi, Justin. I am going to share my screen and hope that you can all, hold on one second. I have to find the place to hit the share button. There we go. Hopefully you can all see that. I see Paula nodding, so I'm going to keep going. All right, so I want to talk about the CenturyLink property. Some of you may remember this as having been called the Level 3 property. It was bought out from Level 3 by CenturyLink several years ago. And I want to show you several different things here. Let's see if I can get this activated. Okay, so here is the vicinity map. You can see the town of Superior is circled in yellow. The property is outlined in red. It's kind of an irregular shape of property right down there on Highway 128 and just east of McCaslin Boulevard. And that slide comes out of, oops, sorry, hang on, I gotta get back to my notes here. Comes from something that the Conservation Fund provided for us. And this proposal involves a $15,063,000 purchase by the town of Superior. And the town of Superior has asked Boulder County to be a partner and has asked us for $2,250,000, in exchange for which the county would get a conservation easement over the property. And this property happens to be the town's highest priority for open space acquisition. It's also been a long time county priority as well. And then Jefferson County and the City and County of Broomfield may also be partners and contribute funding to the deal. If they were to do so, which we think is likely, at least for Jefferson County, they're a little further along in their process than Broomfield is, so we're still waiting to hear from them. But staff supports Jefferson County and both Broomfield supports investing, and they have to go through their public processes just like we're doing today. And if they were to do so, they would get a partial interest in the conservation easement. Those contributions would happen later, those partial interests would happen later, and Boulder County would be the primary holder of the conservation easement, and we would do all of the monitoring and managing of the easement interest. This map was also provided by the Conservation Fund, and my thanks to Justin for doing that, because our aerial imagery of the world sort of stops at the edge of Boulder County line, and it's a little hard to piece things together, so appreciate that he did that for us. As you can see, this red star over here in the lower left corner just marks the corner of McCaslin and Highway 128. Gives you a sense to get a bearing of where that is in the world, and keep a watch for that in the next slide or two, because I've got that same red star on the map. The property consists of about 182 acres. About 102 of them are in Boulder County. The other 80 are in Jefferson County. The land is vacant and is very hilly, so it's not really used for anything by CenturyLink. but CenturyLink has allowed several social trails to develop on the property. And this slide and the next one are from the Rocky Mountain Greenway feasibility study that was done in 2016. And they show the property as being part of that study. And there's a yellow line that identifies a potential trail connecting to the dotted green line for one of the existing social trails on the property that's called the St. Francis Trail. So the nice thing about this is it would help with the Rocky Mountain Greenway objectives. And this is just a closer look of that, give you a sense of that with that slide. And then here's some photos of the property. This first photo, you can see Highway 128 in the upper left background, just below the windmills that you see there. And the property is straight in front of me as I took the picture. And then you can see some houses down in the lower end, and that's part of Rock Creek Farm. This moves over a little bit, shows a little bit more of the neighborhood of Rock Creek Farm in the background. And then this is a photo of one of the social trails through the property. And you can see the CenturyLink building in the upper right background. And there have not been any trail evaluations or any natural resource evaluations done on the property yet, since this is private property. We do understand that Superior will allow continued social use of the property, and they may decide later to undergo a formal process to determine more about the best uses of the property for open space. That's when questions about designating trails or protecting natural resources would be addressed, and that would all be through the Town of Superior's public processes. And then this is a photo that Justin took this morning. My photos were from last week, and I thought I got a beautiful one this morning that looks more northeast, also shows CenturyLink in the background as well. And then this is a photo looking almost directly south. The highway is just over the top of the hill. You can see some lighting up there that's associated with the highway, but it gives you a sense of what the property looks like once you're in the middle of it. So I'm wondering if anyone has questions. Staff recommends this project for approval and hopes that POSAC does the same.
Thanks, Janice. Let's this time, Heather, how about you up first? Any questions?
Just mainly a comment. It looks like a nice space to connect trails from Colton Trail or High Plains Trail over there. It seems like a nice connector for that, but will that eventually, I guess that would go through the public process
Go
later.
through the public process,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
Super. Thanks, Heather. Jen?
Yeah, quick question on the social trails. Would the county allow people to continue to use the social trails as they exist until the public process happened, or would they close those down?
The county won't own the property, so it would be up to Superior, but as I mentioned, Superior plans to allow them to continue, and Boulder County's conservation easement would allow them to be there.
Okay,
So
thanks.
we do expect public use of the property over time.
Cool.
Good. Paula?
Yeah, just a question on those social trails also, that since we'd be contributing money towards the acquisition, hopefully, whether the trail stays in the alignment it is right now as a social trail or in a better alignment to protect habitat, I would think that the county would have some influence over Superior's decision-making process and their public process on that, I would hope.
Yes, I do believe that's correct. There is a referral process, and we would be part of that, where we'd get a chance to opine on that. Jeff Moline and I have been talking about this together, and he is our point person for comments about trails, and particularly in this area with the Rocky Mountain Greenway. So we would provide information that we think is important to that and would encourage that use to continue. Although I'm just going to go back to this slide. You know, the trail looks pretty good right there, but it does kind of go down the hill and go straight down the hill. So there, you're right that there might be some additional work that needs to be done to route the trails differently than they exist today.
And it certainly seems like a connection to that neighborhood, to the Rocky Mountain Greenway Trail, is a logical and probably a pretty important connection to make. So I'm not opposed to that. I just think that the county's input on that process would be important.
Yes, I agree.
Thanks, Paula. Trace?
Yeah, I've got 4 things written down here, and as I go through them, some of them may have been answered, but with all of the different jurisdictions involved here, would the Boulder County easement cover the entire property or some fragment of it, or?
It would cover the entire piece, even the portion in Jefferson County, yes.
Okay. And looking at Google Earth, I see there's a high voltage line running through the southwestern corner there with cell towers on it. So, and it's visible here, I see in the what you have on the screen. So is there some right-of-way or easement that the power company owns through here?
There is, and it actually appears on other maps to extend from Indiana Street straight north to McCaslin Boulevard.
Okay. And then there's been considerable comment tonight here on the social trails. And when I look at this area on Cal Topo, there are quite a few social trails. It's not just, you know, a social trail or 1 or 2, but there's quite a network in there. So, you know, talking about continued access, are the other trails in good shape? Is there a concern for sustainability or deterioration of the trail surface until such time as the different jurisdictions can get in there and produce a management plan?
So those are good questions. Those are things that the town of Superior will have to evaluate, which I would assume would indicate to it whether or not they need to proceed with the management plan sooner rather than later, or whether they can just let the trails exist as they are.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you, Trace. Kira?
My colleagues are very thorough. No questions.
Hey, Stephen.
What Kira said. Thank you.
Okay, Scott Miller.
Yeah, no questions.
Ann?
No questions.
I do not have any questions. At this time, are there any public comments, questions?
Yes, we have one, and I'd like to share my screen to bring it up. And I think I could just, there we go. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, the comment is from Audrey Tobin from 3555 Bison Drive in Boulder. And her comment is, I support the decision to move forward with this acquisition. Growing up in Jefferson County, just down Indiana Street from this site, it has been disappointing to see the residential and commercial development in this area continue. I remember when the office buildings were first built east on Colorado 128 and how they sat empty for years until they were changed to more residential buildings. The land in this area should be in the hands of the town of Superior with the help of Boulder County, Broomfield County, and Jefferson County to manage for conservation or recreation rather than another industrial site. And that's the only comment.
Thank you, and thank you for the citizens' comment. At this time, Chair will entertain a motion.
Kira Pasquazi, I move to approve the transaction as described by staff.
Trace Baker, second.
Any discussion? At this time, I move to a vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Any abstentions? Let the record show the motion was approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. The next item of business is the use preference and visitor experiences of people with disabilities on parks and open space. And we have Michelle with us this evening.
Thanks for having me here this evening. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my PowerPoint now. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm. Good.
Wonderful. So as they said, today I'm here to share information about a project that was assigned to me as a part of the 2020 strategic vision. One of the goals in the vision is to plan for demographic shifts with an objective to create a diversity plan to engage new and underrepresented populations and partners. This study was completed to develop a better understanding of the visitor experience of people with disabilities on open space properties, as well as the family, friends, and local organizations that visit open space properties with people with disabilities. The results from the interviews and survey are being used to help staff identify potential projects, improvements to our parks. Conducting this research is important because we as a department are committed to providing recreation opportunities to everyone in our community. And according to the US Census Bureau, nearly 1 in 5 people in the US have a disability. And although people of all ages have disabilities, older people are even more likely to have a disability. Since we know that the share of the population in Boulder County that is over the age of 65 is set to grow in coming years, that is another reason it's important to collect this information now. This slide highlights the purpose and objectives of the research. We were specifically interested in visitation patterns, activity preferences, previous experiences on open space, preferred features for park amenities and trails, and the usability and availability of information about parks. Again, the goal being to improve the visitor experience at our parks in the future. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Huh, weird. Okay, sorry about that. The study was conducted in 2 phases. First, I did interviews with local organizations that provide services for people with disabilities and visit open space properties. A total of 7 interviews were conducted, and they were between 30 minutes to an hour in length. And I recorded the interviews so I could accurately report the responses. Then the results of those interviews were used to inform the second part of the study, which was an online survey. It was the survey was designed for people with disabilities as well as families, friends, and those who work with people with disabilities to fill out. And we ended up with a total of 124 surveys that were completed and usable out of 168 survey respondents. We removed the survey respondents that only completed the first 1 or 2 questions of the survey. In the first question of the survey, people were asked to identify the option that best describes how they were responding to the survey. A total of 53% indicated they were a person with a disability or helping someone with a disability complete the survey, and 47% indicated that they were a family member, friend, or worked with someone with a disability, and they were completing it from their personal perspective. People in the interviews and surveys were both told to try to avoid discussion of urban and developed parks, so schoolyards, playgrounds, sports field, anything with really manicured grass. And we really wanted to steer the conversation towards parks and open spaces similar to those that are managed by Boulder County Parks and Open Space. And so we asked the organizations that they had visited our properties, we want them to share those experiences, but we only had 2 out of the 7 organizations that had visited our parks. So we told them they could still help by sharing their experiences at other similar open space properties. So it can be said that those results are more general, whereas for the online survey, only 3 survey respondents that went to parks in the last year had not visited a Boulder County Parks and Open Space property. So those results are really considered more specific to our properties. The survey respondents were asked to describe their disability in their own words. And the respondents' reported disability was grouped into categories, as you can see on this chart. It's important to note that some people may have reported more than one disability, and so they might be included in multiple categories. The majority of respondents reported a mobility and physical impairment of some kind. On the other hand, all of the organizations we interviewed serve people with a wide variety of disabilities, including mobility and physical impairments and developmental and intellectual disabilities. Before we dive into the results a little bit more, I want to make it clear that the study was qualitative in nature. So due to the specific targeted population, we utilized non-probability sampling. For the interviews, we identified organizations that met our criteria and requested participation. It's also known as a convenience sample. And then for the surveys, we had a self-selected sample of people who heard about the survey and chose to go online to answer the questions. We advertised for the survey in a wide variety of channels, including we posted flyers to our kiosks, we posted information on the website, we used social media and press releases. And so the goal was to get feedback. We wanted to have a conversation and gather some ideas. Both organizations and survey respondents report visiting open space and parks frequently. So 5 out of 7 organizations and about 2 out of 3 survey respondents reported visiting open space properties at least once a month or weekly. Only 11% of the people who completed the survey didn't visit open space in the past year. And the most common reasons given for not visiting parks include parks are not accessible, it's hard to get to parks, I don't have anyone to go to parks with, and I don't have enough information about what parks will be like for me. Organizations most often planned their outings during the summer, and the majority of them provide transportation to the trailhead. 5 out of 7 provided transportation to the trailhead. Whereas most survey respondents, they get to open space using cars, but walking and biking was also commonly reported. The Boulder County Parks and Open Space properties most frequently visited by survey respondents included, as you can see, Walden Ponds Wildlife Habitat, Boulder Canyon Trail, Hile Valley Ranch, Batasso Preserve, and Caribou Ranch. And as I mentioned earlier, only 3 survey respondents reported that they have not visited a Boulder County Parks and Open Space property. And it's not displayed on the slide, but the 2 organizations that did report visiting Boulder County Parks and Open Space mentioned going to locations like Pella Crossing, Loggerman Agricultural Preserve, Twin Lakes, Walden Ponds Wildlife Habitat, and Mud Lake. The examples of open spaces visited by the organizations that hadn't visited our parks, they varied widely. They were all over the map, but properties with water were mentioned most often. So organizations were most frequently visiting open space properties and trails near lakes, reservoirs, creeks, rivers. Organizations, they often chose to go to an open space for a specific activity that they wanted to do. The 3 most common activities they reported were hiking, sports, and fishing. The outdoor activities reported for sports, though, are most frequently done at urban parks with manicured grass rather than open space properties. So I included it because they mentioned it, but they are not done at open space properties. And the most common activities survey respondents report are walking or hiking on trails, viewing wildlife, bringing a dog, gathering with friends and family, or picnicking. We asked both organizations and the survey respondents if the type of visitor activities allowed at open space affect whether or not they choose to visit a property. And we found that the types of visitor activities allowed do not affect most of the organization's decision whether or not to visit a property, but they do strongly affect the majority of survey respondents' decision whether or not to visit. So only 2 organizations would choose not to visit a property if biking is allowed. All other organizations said, you know, they like multi-use trails. Some even mentioned they prefer places with multiple uses to expose the participants in their groups to a wide variety of recreational activities. And so instead, they said that they consider things about the weather, crowding, accessibility, what's the visitor experience going to be like, and are the people in their group going to enjoy going to that location? And on the other hand, 75% of survey respondents said the types of activities do affect their choice whether or not to visit a property. And so the most common reasons, some people said they need trails that are easily walkable or accessible, or they choose to go places where dogs are allowed, or they avoid areas with heavy bikers or not heavy bikers, with lots of bikers or heavy bike use, and that they decide based on whether the activity they want to do is allowed. The next few questions we asked were open-ended. We asked both organizations and survey respondents to reflect on a past visit to any open space, and therefore those results are more general to all parks. And the goal was really to learn about what's the most memorable aspect of a visit to open space. So when we asked them to tell us about a positive experience, for organizations, supportive, friendly staff and people were really important to a positive experience. Other common themes they had, just getting outdoors, enjoying the fresh air and exercise, and new fun experiences like fishing. One organization mentioned letterboxing, which, if you don't know what that is, it's very similar to geocaching. Letterboxers, they hide a small box in a park with a rubber stamp inside, and people who find the box get an imprint in their notebook. And then the online surveys, enjoying the views, beauty, and scenery were the most common positive memories that they mentioned. But they also mentioned nice conversations with other visitors. And they mentioned wildlife viewing and bird watching, having well-maintained trails and parks. On the other hand, we asked about a disappointment or problem that people might have experienced during a visit. And the most common problem mentioned by organizations are really logistical issues. So issues of parking, they come in large groups. Are there enough parking spaces? Can they fit their bus or their van? How far away is the parking spot from where they need to go? Permits could be a challenge. Some organizations have larger groups, so they need to go through a permitting process, so they may need assistance going through that. And then organization staffing. So do they have staff that can go and lead these outdoor opportunities? Do they have the time to do that? Similarly, not enough parking or problems with parking were the most common problem reported by survey respondents. So other problems that the organizations listed included, that lack of time. They was a mention of rude park staff, not Boulder County Parks and Open Space staff, thankfully, for that comment, but that is a concern, having rude park staff. Poorly maintained or hard to access trails, poor signage, or the experience at the property didn't match the description online and they weren't able to do what they thought they were going to be able to do, or the bathrooms not being accessible. Survey respondents, other problems, they also had problems with, issues with trails not being accessible to wheelchairs or uneven trails, but then a lot of their comments were related to a visitor conflict. So maybe bikes going too fast or bikers' lack of communication, dogs off leash or aggressive dogs off leash, and then dog poop or poop bags being on the trail. Okay, design features for amenities. Before I discuss these results, I just want to mention that people with disabilities and the people from the organizations I interviewed, like every other park visitor, naturally have really varied opinions and preferences for amenities. So you may notice when you go through and read the results in the report, there's some contradictory opinions regarding the quantity and types of amenities that different people want. And the organizations I interviewed really offered a wide variety of programs, ranging from just spending time outdoors to very adventurous outings like rock climbing or fly fishing. However, all groups agree that there should be a higher standard of quality for the amenities at the trailhead, and then trails and amenities further out into the trail system can be more rustic or minimalistic. For the interviews, various park amenities, parking lots, restrooms, they were written on cards with photos, and then I asked the organizations to organize those amenities into a hierarchy of importance from most important to least important to their experience. And then after ranking each of the amenities, I asked them to kind of talk more about the design features that they would like to see for those amenities. And so you can find those detailed responses in the report, but the three most important amenities ended up being restrooms, trails, and parking lots for the organizations. And the three least important amenities were trash recycling, trailhead kiosks, and educational signs. A lot of people that were leading these hikes, they actually scout before they go out. And so they said that trailhead kiosks and educational signs, sometimes they go and plan the hike ahead of time, so those may be less important to them. And they also are willing to pack in and pack out their trash if they have a large group. For the online survey respondents, we asked a scale question, and it was kind of the same thing, rating amenities importance to their experience, not important at all, to absolutely essential. So it was a different method of asking the same question. And the three most important amenities to the online survey respondents were trails, parking lots, and trail signage. And then the least important amenities were trailhead kiosks, picnic shelters, and fishing piers. but we didn't have a lot of anglers fill out the survey. So fishing piers were a little higher for the organizations. It kind of ended up in the middle, and we just didn't have a huge response from anglers. So I'd take that with a grain of salt. We asked an open-ended question about what other amenities not listed they look for when visiting parks. And other amenities organizations reported included water fountains, gathering areas for large groups of people, accessible gates, so gates that are wide enough, gates that don't have a bar at the bottom that aren't too heavy, shade. They go out in the summer a lot and would like some shade, good trail maintenance, and information about accessible trails online. And then the other amenities survey respondents reported included accessible trail design, smooth, handholds for incline, knowing about how difficult a trail is. Again, they wanted shade, accessible parking, and there was a couple reports of access to parks using public transport rather than driving an individual vehicle, and then places that provide easy accommodation for wheelchairs. We asked survey respondents to what extent a variety of items were a problem during their visit to open space. So lack of accessible picnic shelters or tables, restrooms, parking spots, all of those amenities. And I know this is a busy slide, but here are some takeaways. 52% of respondents reported that a lack of accessible parking spots was a considerable or severe problem. So again, that goes back to the issue of parking. 48% reported a lack of accessible trails as a considerable or severe problem, and 40% reported a lack of an accessible restroom as a considerable or severe problem. For the most part, lack of accessible picnic shelters or tables, trash recycling, and a fishing pier were not considered a problem or only a small or slight problem. We also asked survey respondents to rate the number of informational signs, directional signs, and benches or places to rest. And the important thing for this slide is really that 57% of survey respondents thought there were too few benches or places to rest during their visit. So they would like a few more places to rest or benches on the trail. In terms of the number of signs, people think they're about the right number of signs. Lastly, we asked some questions about the availability and usability of information about parks and open space. Organizations and survey respondents most often gather information about open space online. Additionally, kind of a surprise to me was that person-to-person communication is commonly used to gather information. And that was both for organizations and survey respondents. So organizations mentioned maybe having a trusted agency contact or word of mouth from somebody else who had taken a group to that location. And likewise, survey respondents, they hear information from family or friends about which parks to go to. The information, we asked what information they look for when they go to find information about parks, and organizations are looking for information about their group experience. So accessible restrooms and picnic areas, trail safety and trail details. They want the actual details like the length and cross slope, grade, difficulty, what material was mentioned a lot, what activities are permitted, property features, pictures or a virtual tour of the property would be nice for them. So maybe they could do a little less scouting. And sometimes that's a long drive. And the top three things that survey respondents look for is where's the property, those trail details again, and then are they accessible trails or not? We asked if they're having any problems finding the information they need to plan a visit. And 4 of the 7 organizations reported sometimes or always having problems finding the information they need to plan a visit. And the things they said that were hard to find are the details about the trail, photos and videos of amenities. So they say there's lots of landscape photos, beautiful photos of properties, but there's no photos of restrooms or how close the picnic shelter is to the parking lot, those sort of photos. And no information about whether or not property is accessible, or possibly talking to staff and staff not able to really definitively answer whether or not a property is accessible. About half of the survey respondents, 55%, didn't have a problem finding information. You know, a lot of them have visited our parks in the past, so maybe we have some repeat visitors. But for the 45% that, you know, we're having problems or not sure if they know if they're finding the information they need, what they said they were missing was the trail details, wheelchair accessible trails, which activities are allowed, are dogs allowed off leash, and accessible facilities relative to parking. So after the interviews were completed, I met with staff to develop some preliminary recommendations based on the results. And now that we have the findings from the surveys, I plan after these presentations to meet with staff again, update the recommendations further. And I included a few just to kind of show you, and they are in the report. They're just draft recommendations that we're working through. So the first one, we already have a lot of partnerships with organizations that serve people with disabilities, but it doesn't hurt to do more. So to try to build more on being that trusted contact. So providing information directly to local organizations, maybe assisting them if they have gatherings of more than 25 people with that special use permitting process. And then just being able to offer suggestions on places to visit, provide those guided hikes and additional fishing programs, since that was a lot of people really enjoyed that. And we have all the fishing poles and supplies to do that. Then we want to ensure that open space staff who have public contact are aware of which parks and trails are accessible, so they can be a reliable resource for organizations and visitors. So just making that a part of our training, which parks and trails we would recommend for people that use wheelchairs. Updating and improving information on the website. We've been working on this for a while since we did the interviews. We have been going around taking photos of various amenities. You know, it was kind of news to us that people wanted photos of restrooms on the webpage. So we've been taking photos of the restrooms, the parking lot and picnic shelter. We've also been doing 360 photos in the trailhead, which will give you a view kind of how close amenities are to the trailhead. They aren't on the website yet, but we're kind of gathering all that information now. And then as possible, strategically update amenities and trails. I'm on the amenities team, and we've been looking at locations where potentially we could add more benches. And so we've been doing some field trips to sites to identify additional locations. And a lot of them are those ones that people would adopt or they would purchase as a memorial bench. And then we could add additional benches as more memorial benches are requested. And then last, one of the recommendations was just during future planning processes to make sure to reach out to organizations that serve people with disabilities and individuals to provide feedback about proposed designs as they come up. And that'll make sure that we're able to provide opportunities and welcome people of all abilities to enjoy open space as we build new trails and new facilities. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Michelle. Let's do this. We're going to bump up against the clock, but I'm going to make a comment, and then Jen, I'll come to you and we'll just try to go through POSAC and see what questions we have. But I sat down this morning after coming from King Soopers shopping, Michelle, and read your report cover to cover. And the only comment I would make is you gathered there's an enormous amount of information, but the thing that jumped off the page to me, if I could sum it in one word, was accessibility. And coming from King Soopers and being an old man, they let me shop there early, right, the past couple months. And so what I flashed on is when I look at accessibility, parking lot issues and some of the other things, I thought about King Soopers' approach to letting people in that group over 60 to shop early. And I wonder, just to plant an idea, not necessarily a recommendation, but maybe you guys can take that back to think through. If you summarize those issues and we look at accessibility, hey, is it giving possibly the disabled access to a trail or a group of trails at a particular time of day that they have it? They have access to all the restrooms. They have access to all the parking spots, something like that. That was the only comment I had, but enormous amount of data. So good luck churning it out. So with that, Jen, I'll jump to you real quick.
I don't have any questions. It's a great report. Thank you for all of that hard work. I remember meeting a staff member at OSMP, actually, a gentleman named Topher, who had wheelchair access, sort of the guy that would go in his wheelchair and check on everything. And I was just wondering, in the future of what you're doing, do you have people who are actually differently abled that you can work with to sort of test what you've done after you've made the changes?
Well, we have been going on outings with these organizations that serve people with disabilities, and that's taught us a lot just from those particular outings. And I'm sure they would be willing to help us to go out and evaluate more. A lot of them are willing to try new things and go to new places and see how it works and work through those issues. And for example, we went out to the Agricultural Heritage Center and we found a gate that had a bar on the bottom. Never had thought it was a problem until we had a group out there and we were trying to lift a wheelchair over that gate. And then we were able to go out and remove that bar, and now it's not an accessibility issue anymore.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen. Paula?
Yeah, I have a few questions. So I did find Topher, Jen mentioned Topher, his brochure, but I saw that it was dated 2015. I'm wondering if that's kept up to date.
Let's see, I don't know which one. I don't know if there is a new
It was
version.
called the OSMP, and it's
Yeah,
on.
yeah, I know that guide, and there are a few of our properties listed in that guide, although the vast majority is open
Boulder.
space, yeah, City of Boulder parks.
Yeah, I thought it was a really, really good guide, and I think it's got a lot of the information that most groups and individuals would want. The one thing I have learned from my experience in park development is that we tend to look at ADA accessibility as sort of for a certain population, but it crosses over to able-bodied people all over the place, especially moms with young children, somebody visiting who's got a grandmother or whatever. So I think a lot of it is just universal accessibility is really where I think it needs to go. For instance, on the benches, the recommendation to have benches every half mile, I think is great for most people, but certainly, for this population as well. The gradient, the width, and the surfacing, I think is huge. And yeah, I didn't find that anywhere. I think that would be a really important thing to have. And I guess what the question I have for you, Michelle, is has the county done an ADA assessment of its parks and trails, using the most recent guidelines from the Americans with Disabilities Act? Because that actually has requirements for an accessibility plan and then to work towards meeting those objectives. I know the city of Longmont completed one a few years ago and has been earmarking funding on a yearly basis to making improvements towards that end.
Yeah, I wonder if someone else could jump in with a better explanation than me. I knew this was coming up, that the county was going to be doing some sort of review of accessibility for buildings, and they were looking at adding on parks, but maybe somebody else from Parks knows a little bit more than me about where that stands right now.
Yeah, this is Eric Lane, Director for Parks and Open Space. The county, through I think the Admin Services Division, did hire a consultant to work for at least this year, maybe into next year, doing an evaluation of county facilities, both traditional, like our buildings, but they added onto that contract an assessment of all of our trailheads. So that'll look at parking spaces, restrooms, path quality, grades, all that kind of stuff in the trailhead and shelter areas. So that is being done. And I would say, I don't know that we're going to see very many surprises, but I'll be glad if they turn something up. I think staff feel pretty confident that a lot of attention has been paid in the past to those areas, and we're pretty confident that they are ADA standard. But it's nice to have a second set of eyes, proof check all that, and point out if we've missed anything.
Yeah, we were quite surprised on how many misses we had in our system, and I would suggest that things like a small like Lycan's Loop Trail down at Heil would be a perfect one to try to just actually meet all of the criteria of ADA and make that, you know, from small children to somebody in a wheelchair, that it's got the cross slope, it's got the surfacing, etc. And then the last comment I had was I was walking Loggerman today, and how easy it would be to make that very flat trail, because really the only problem with it that I see right now is the surfacing. You've got from very rough road base up to just hard packed soil. And so a crusher fines treatment over the top of that would make it a fully accessible trail as long as it was maintained. So I think some, you know, pretty modest improvements could really improve the accessibility for a lot of people.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your work, though. It's very good.
Trace?
Trace Baker here. Michelle, I also want to congratulate you for an excellent design, execution, and report. And if other staff contributed, please pass my thanks on to them. First question, you had a slide on where do you go to get information, and one respondent comment I saw said, update and improve information about accessible parks and trails. Have you thought about adding information on accessibility either to the Boulder Trails app or to Cotrex?
That's a good idea. I haven't had that on the recommendations yet, because that came out after our first round of recommendations, but that's a great idea, Trace, to look at.
Okay, thank you. Second question is ensure that open space who have public contact, staff who have public contact, maintenance staff outreach. Does outreach include volunteer naturalists, volunteer rangers? Will they get trained?
Yeah, I think that would be an important group to look at, especially volunteer naturalists who are leading hikes and volunteer rangers who are out there giving information to people about where they might want to go to do different activities. I think that would be a good group to make sure they have that information.
Okay, thank you. And final question. There was a number of mentions of problems related to other visitors. And by very rough count, the word bike came up 52 times and dog came up 72 times, often in a safety concern, for example, can cause falls. And has there been thought to an alternative, for example, for having no dog days at some trailheads? As an alternative to maybe, you know, modifying or constructing trails for accessibility?
I haven't thought about that yet. I don't know if that management solution has been discussed by our management staff yet. But it's certainly something to think about. We do have a few properties where dogs aren't allowed at all. In some trails at our locations where there are bikes, where bikes aren't allowed. So at Heil, you can use the Lichen Loop and the new Grindstone Quarry Trail and the Nighthawk Trail at Hall. But that's something to think about.
Yeah, it's similar to Jim's comment on you know, accessibility times. But that's all I have. So thank you very much, Michelle.
Thanks, Trace. Kira?
Yes, hi, Michelle. I was wondering a little bit more about partnerships and the kind of the scope of your partnerships. Particularly, I was thinking oftentimes when we talk about disability, we go straight to physical disabilities, but thinking about the mental, cognitive, psychological, and if that's been taken into consideration in terms of partnerships.
Yeah, so we work with a wide variety of organizations that serve people with different disabilities, especially at the Agricultural Heritage Center. They have a lot of partnerships. But yeah, I would say that a lot of the organizations that we work with, they do serve people that just have a wide variety of disabilities. Some might not have any of those physical mobility issues. But yes, I would say that we do work with a wide variety of organizations that serve people with all different types of disabilities rather than just people that have mobility issues.
Okay. Yeah, I just trying to be reflective during this time and like the post-pandemic world, even though we're far from it. But mental health in particular stands out, right, as an area of continued concern. Thank you. I was also wondering about principles or universal design principles for the website or for the video or for surveys, for any flyers or materials, and if you all have considered that.
Well, Nick Brockman helped me with designing the survey to make sure that it was considered accessible. And so if he's here, I'll let him jump in about the website, what they're doing. You around, Nick?
Just unmuting myself. This is Dick Brockman, Web Administrator with Parks and Open Space. Yes, we consider accessibility on the website an important factor. We run our web pages through different accessibility tests to make sure things meet the different criteria there. So that is something that we consider important, that we do take into consideration with the website.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay.
And then lastly, I wondered, are there symbols on trailheads for wheelchair accessible trails? I haven't noticed it, and now I'm going to look out for it, but I was curious.
Yeah, keep your eye out. You will see it for the wheelchair accessible trails. And we also are putting it on maps as well. I was just editing the Walden Ponds map today, and we have 2 of those symbols for the areas, the boardwalk area and the accessible pier over at Wally Taves. So they're out there.
I was just thinking about this really as a lens that we can all wear, and just thinking about, like, Trace was bringing up volunteers or some of our ambassadors, like, well, we do see issues if we can wear this lens. Michelle, would you be the person that we would go to, or is that like, and thinking about communicate some of those concerns if we do see those while we're experiencing our open spaces?
Yeah, I'd be happy for you to come to me and let me know if you have any concerns or things that come up, because I am focusing on this area. I do work with the volunteer rangers, so it'd probably be training them, and I train education outreach park patrol staff. So I do have some role in that, but I would work with other staff who maybe run other volunteer programs, and they would probably manage training for their own volunteers.
Thank you.
Okay. Stephen?
I just want to say thank you. It was eye-opening for me. I have to say that in using open space, I haven't really thought about these issues very much in the past, just to be honest. So the whole survey was kind of like, opened my thinking about that. And I appreciate your hard work on it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks. Scott Miller?
Yeah, I just wanted to say this is a great study to have. I know doing our pumpkin patch and corn maze, I've always been really intrigued by how much interest we get from different groups, and asking us questions about these exact things you guys are looking at and studying right now. There's definitely a lot of people that want to get out and use our open space, as long as they can figure out if they are able to.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. Ann?
Yeah, thanks for the great work on an important project. My colleagues stole all of my questions. They're very thorough. I'll add, though, when I worked at Chautauqua years ago, we worked on installing the ADA restrooms for the auditorium. And it was amazing, the appreciation from the public, who were now able to return to that park and enjoy it because of one simple amenity. So as you go through the process, any small change can make a really big difference to a lot of people. So thanks for your efforts.
Yeah. Thanks, Ann. Heather?
mute here. No, I just, I think my questions were answered, but thank you for a detailed report and a well-designed study. It is important that we are reaching everyone who's using open space.
Yeah.
And so,
Thank you,
thank you.
Heather. Ms. V, do we have any online comments?
No, we have no online comments on this issue.
Thank you. As an information-only item, we will leave that. Thank you, Michelle, for all your hard work. Keep at it. Much appreciate you coming out this evening.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda, they said the best for last. Tim Schaefer will be talking about post-flood monitoring of the Preble Meadow jumping mouse.
Hello, everybody. I'm working on getting my presentation going here. All right, can we see my presentation?
Yeah, you're good, Tim. Looks good.
All right, great, thanks. Yes, I'm Tim Schaefer. I'm a wildlife biologist with Parks and Open Space on staff here, and I've been working, for 7 years now on primarily flood recovery work, and a big piece of that for wildlife staff has been monitoring wildlife in those flood impacted areas. So tonight I just want to give you a brief summary of 5 years of post-flood monitoring of the Preble's Meadow jumping mouse on our Parks and Open Space properties. And let me see if I can get this to advance. All right, so I think we all are familiar with the impacts from the 2013 flood event. You know, we saw in our streams around our habitat, we saw erosion and aggradation, avulsions where the creeks left the channel, and in some cases we saw downcutting of our streams where riparian vegetation became disconnected from the local water table, causing the vegetation to die out. One of the species that we're concerned about in terms of flood impacts to wildlife and wildlife habitat is the Preble's Meadow jumping mouse. Prebles are protected under the Endangered Species Act and listed as threatened due to loss of riparian habitat. This loss has been the result of anthropogenic impacts, including overgrazing of riparian areas, urbanization, alteration of natural hydrologic regimes, and the establishment of non-native vegetation. And what remains of their habitat, in many cases, is fragmented and consists of isolated patches of prebles throughout their range. So prebles are riparian obligate, which means they absolutely depend on riparian habitat for their existence. Research has shown that isolated wildlife populations are unstable and vulnerable to inbreeding and extirpation, meaning local extinction. So prebles are a subspecies of jumping mouse that is endemic to the Colorado Front Range and foothills of southeastern Wyoming, meaning that what you see on the map there is their entire global distribution. Their habitat is typically comprised of well-developed plains riparian vegetation with adjacent, relatively undisturbed grassland communities and a nearby water source. The riparian areas include a relatively dense combination of grasses, forbs, and shrubs, and they're known to regularly sort of range out of the riparian zone to forage and hibernate in the adjacent uplands. And their diet consists primarily of insects, seeds, fungi, and pollen, and that shifts seasonally as different food resources become available. And these guys are also true hibernators. They're about 2 feet underground hibernating from about mid-October to mid-May. So the flood provided a unique opportunity to study wildlife following a large, infrequent natural flood event. The documentation of the post-flood distribution and status of prebles in the county was important for assisting with regulatory compliance and flood recovery efforts. Most of our flood recovery projects required Fish and Wildlife Service consultation on some level, and information from our trapping efforts has been used since then by the federal government, state government, and local entities in regulation of flood recovery activities to help minimize impacts to prebles and their habitat during those flood recovery efforts. Information from these studies can be used to inform management and guide our responses to future floods. We can use what we learned to aid in the development of strategic resource management plans to restore riparian habitat and habitat connectivity for prebles. So we had 2 guiding questions in our monitoring effort here. I think we wanted to know, where did prebles end up after the flood? And not really anybody knew. Folks thought they drowned or were washed down to Nebraska. And then the follow-up questions, once we figured out where they ended up, we wanted to know how they're doing. And so in 2014, 2015, we did a presence-absence study to determine that distribution, the post-flood distribution of Prebbles. And then we followed that up and for a 3-year capture recapture or mark recapture study to determine the post-flood population status and trend. So where we had Prebbles, we wanted to know how they were doing. And we were able to get estimates of their density, meaning number of mice per stream kilometer or mile, and estimates of annual survival. And we really focused on our St. Vrain populations for that, because that's where we knew we had a good number of mice. So for the presence and absence study, we cast a wide net to figure out where Prebbles ended up after the flood. The pink lines in this map represent streams that intersect parks and open space land and county conservation easements. And we use this to aid in selecting sample sites. And this includes perennial, ephemeral, and intermittent streams, as well as some ditches. We shot to sample streams in all the watersheds in the county, and those are represented here in the different shades of gray. And we try to get a balanced representation based on the amount of stream miles per watershed. So for the presence absence study, we sampled 28 sites in total. We did 14 each summer. We were trapping from June through the second week of September. And we'd trap for 3 consecutive nights, and then we'd pick up our traps and go to the next location the next week. The trap transect would include 250 traps distributed over a kilometer reach of stream. And so what you're seeing here is a map of the sampled area. The black symbols are sites that were selected for sampling. You see some red symbols have popped up, and those are sites where Prebbles were known from historically, but were not detected during our trapping effort in 2014 and 2015. You'll see that South County populations disappeared. But many of these sites hadn't been trapped for 10 to 15 years, so we can't really conclusively say that it was a flood related that they disappeared, but we just know that they're not there now. And let's see, the green symbols really just here along the St. Vrain area are areas where Prebbles were pre-flood and we trapped, and they were still there after the flood, which is amazing because this area right here was probably a half mile wide. I lived right around here then. We walked down and saw that, and it's amazing they survived that. So Prebbles were present on the St. Vrain in areas where they were known before. It's just sort of summarizing our general results here. But one of the things we discovered was a new population on our Golden Fredstrom property. This is now the easternmost location on St. Vrain. They hadn't been known to be east of that bridge there prior to the flood. Again, we don't know if they hopped over there prior to the flood or were washed down during the flood. There's no way to really ascertain that, but we know that they're farther east than they had been detected before. And there was a study through this area that we hired out, or I'm not sure, I don't think it was a grant, but we had some population studies from some consultants in 2005, I believe, that surveyed this area, and they did not detect them here then. Here's an area I'm going to talk a little more about later on, but this is our along the south branch through our Gage and Sprawley and Sadar properties, where we had mice that they never were there before because it was all grazed pasture, and we did some restoration work in there that I'll talk about here in a little bit. So the presence absence study gave us a good picture of where Prebbles were post-flood, but we still wanted to know how they're doing. In 2016, we initiated a 3-year mark recapture study of known Prebbles populations on the St. Vrain Creek to assess population status. We used Sherman traps, these rectangular metal boxes here. These are live traps to capture the mice. And then when we caught the mice, we would mark individual mice by implanting a pit tag under their skin between shoulder blades. Pit tag is a passive integrative transponder. It's these little guys right here, about the size of a grain of rice, and it's what you would chip your dog with. And once we marked individuals, we would release them back into the population, and then we continue trapping to try and get as many recaptures as possible. And when we captured individuals subsequently, we'd scan them with a tag reader and try to identify recaptures of marked individuals. And this method helps us to more accurately estimate the actual population size, density, and survival rate. So We had 2 trapping sessions, and this really had to do with the amount of work we could get done in one session. We would do 8 nights on 4 transects for over a period of 2 weeks, and then we would switch our transects to the next 4 transects and do that for another 8 nights. And we had 100 traps stretched over a half-kilometer reach of stream, and they gave us 6,400 total trap nights. Which trap night is just the number of traps per night total. So it's just a measure of effort. I apologize for this map. GIS has been a little difficult working remotely. But so this is a stretch of St. Vrain Creek between Lyons to the left and Lama to the right. And this is the main stem of St. Vrain here, and this is the south branch of St. Vrain, which is considered to be a former channel of St. Vrain that has been operated as a feeder ditch over the past 150 years or so to serve water rights. And there's pretty distinct habitat composition between the two, and we wanted to get a good representation of both so we can sort of compare populations between the two. So we have 4 sites located on the main stem itself, here on our Western Mobile property, on the Gage property, on Pella Crossing, and then on our Gold Fredstrom property. And then we have 4 on the South Branch, so on Western Mobile again, on our Brawley and Sadar properties along the South Branch, which is a ag property that we lease to ag tenants. And on the Gage property, we have 2 transects here that run through some restoration areas. So we collaborated with the USGS on the analysis. Research wildlife biologists helped us with the population demography estimates. Currently, these are considered preliminary estimates until we go through their science data review process. The density estimates give us an indication of overall population size. They provide standardized population information that allow for apples-to-apples comparisons with estimates from other studies. And this gives us a reference for population levels relative to other populations in the region. The density estimates range from, let's see, 2 mice per kilometer to 201 mice per kilometer. The range of density estimates from other studies was also broad, but our densities were much higher at specific sites. Let's see, the upper end of the range for other studies was around 40 to 80 mice per kilometer, but you can see we saw estimates in the hundreds at a couple of sites, and even just over 200 at one site in 2018. So these different colors represent the 3 years of sampling here. 27 seemed to be a low year across the board. Need to continue to look into environmental variables and other factors to try and explain this dip. It might have something to do with the number of days sampled. We had to kind of abandon ship a couple times due to a lot of raccoon tampering with our traps. We didn't want to expose the Prebles to any more risk than we needed to. 2018 seemed to be a banner year on the South Branch. All 3 of these sites were really jamming. So we want to do a comparison, like I said, between the main stem and the South Branch. And the South Branch densities were much higher than on the St. Vrain main stem, nearly double in 2016, from 2016 to 2017, and much higher in 2018. So this is really only represents one point in time. We need to continue monitoring to really put together a trend for how these mice densities and the population estimates are changing over time. All right, so the survival estimates is a useful population parameter in wildlife conservation for assessing status and trajectory of a population, as whether it's likely that the population is growing, shrinking, or staying the same. These estimates represent a mean annual survival, so the average survival rate of mice from one year to the next. We had 2 intervals for estimates here, so survival from 2016 to 2017 and 2017 to 2018. Mean annual survival was higher on the South Branch than on St. Vrain main stem, nearly double over both intervals. And survival ranged among sites. You can see quite a bit of variation there, from 4.5% to 29%. Most other studies estimated survival just under 20%. But also documented a wide range of variables. You can see our error bars here are pretty wide. And really, that's just a reflection of low sample size. This is hard-fought data that's pretty common in ecological studies to really try and get as big a sample size as you can. The bigger sample size you have, the more confidence you have in your estimates. So the differences in density and survival between the South Branch and the St. Vrain main stem are likely related to differences in habitat composition. St. Vrain main stem is more dense with more canopy closure from non-native trees, and the South Branch has a more open canopy with dense herbaceous understory and little bare ground. So we also monitored habitat structure and composition on all sites for both the presence-absence study and the mark recapture study. Unfortunately, models for generating these estimates are data hungry, and we have too few samples to include many parameters in the population models to really get at relationships between density and survival and the habitat attributes at those sites. Again, Prebles are naturally rare, and the sampling is pretty labor intensive, and it's really hard to amass enough samples to really get at those kind of complex models with loaded parameters. And we know that Rob Shore is a mammologist with Colorado Natural Heritage Program who's been studying these guys for over 20 years. And he said he wasn't really able to get to those, really getting down to those habitat attributes and relationships with Preble's populations until he amassed upwards of 18 years of data. So I'm continuing to look at different ways to summarize the habitat data to try and tease out the patterns across sites related to Preble's population parameters. So what do we do with all this information? We can work on conservation planning for Preble's recovery at the county level. We've made that commitment in the update to the environmental resources element in 2013 to develop species conservation recovery plans for the county's highest priority species of special concern, and we'll do that for Preble's as well. And that'll be largely guided by the Fish and Wildlife Service's Federal Recovery Plan for Preble's. And the Federal Recovery Plan was released in 2018. And in that recovery plan, they identify site conservation teams as a strategy for implementing the recovery plan at the local watershed level through a broad stakeholder engagement. And since in that time, Fish and Wildlife has approached Parks and Open Space biologists about starting up a site conservation team for the St. Vrain watershed, and anticipating outcomes from a future site conservation team to also influence our species conservation recovery plan for Preble's. Restoration work will be an important part of Preble's recovery throughout its range. We should continue to pursue restoration of degraded riparian habitat, and we need to utilize a suite of tools to ameliorate habitat fragmentation issues where possible. And hopefully we can get at some really good information about the habitat relationships with Preble's populations from our studies to really provide a target for restoration when we find places we think would be good for restoration. And we also need to continue monitoring Preble's populations in the county in coordination with other partner agencies to track those recovery efforts and monitor changes in the population status relative to our flood recovery efforts as the riparian vegetation begins to really establish. So many species depend on a connected landscape to maintain healthy, robust populations over the long term. A connected landscape allows species populations to respond to changes in habitat condition over time. And it also facilitates movement for dispersal and breeding among local populations, which is important for the exchange of genetic material. Having a matrix of connected populations also helps to spread risk from things like disease, natural disturbance like flood and fire, and anthropogenic factors like habitat degradation or climate change. So this is just an heuristic example of a fragmented linear riparian corridor where hypothetical Preble's populations are isolated and disconnected. Habitat connectivity is important for the long-term viability of Preble's on the landscape. And mitigating the effects of habitat loss and fragmentation can be achieved through strategic acquisitions of lands that provide key connectors for isolated populations. And this sentiment was expressed in the Federal Recovery Plan for Preble's, where they said habitat restoration projects should prioritize areas that maintain or enhance connectivity, and prioritize areas that promote connectivity between known populations, as well as between known populations in currently unoccupied but suitable habitat. And so we already have a restoration success story in Parks and Open Space. Our Resource Management Division, specifically our plant ecology group, got a NRCS Wildlife Habitat Improvement Grant in 2006, I believe. And they use that money to restore riparian habitat along the South Branch on our Gage property. So it's Hygiene Road and Crane Hollow. And so they erected grazing and exclosure fences. This is an agricultural property where we have a tenant that is grazing. They move cattle around from different paddocks, but there's grazing on the property year round. And so they erected these exclosure fences around the South Branch and then planted some native woody plants. And there was no mice here before. It wasn't trapped, but it was knowing that it was pretty low stubble from the year-round cattle grazing. It was pretty unlikely there was going to be Prebles there. And in 2014, we went out and trapped Prebles in 4 out of 6 exclosures. So here's just some pictures. You can plainly see the stark difference in vegetation structure and composition on opposite sides of the exclosure fence. And here's some folks doing some maintenance on an all-staff project to help maintain that fence after the flood. Here's just another picture. This is more recent on the South Branch, both inside and outside of the grazing exclosures. You can really just see how lush and dense the vegetation has come in here, and that's really what Prebles are keying in on. So the recent acquisition of the ZAF property about 1.5 years ago provides a good example of land acquisitions as a tool for reconnecting landscapes for wildlife. ZAF property was a missing puzzle piece for connecting important Prebles habitat and St. Vrain corridor. It was an obvious priority for acquisition for the goal of species and habitat conservation. In fact, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had previously shown interest in the property as an important piece to conservation of St. Vrain Prebles populations, which have recently become of elevated importance in the regional picture of Prebles conservation. Prebles populations in the South Branch at our Western Mobile and Gage properties have the highest densities of mice of any other stream reaches that we've sampled. We know that future gravel mining on our Western Mobile property poses a threat to populations here, and populations on the Cedar property continue to be threatened by ditch maintenance activities there. So linking these habitat patches together may prove a key element in conservation of these populations by spreading risk and eliminating barriers to upstream, downstream movement. So that's all I have for you. Again, it's a brief summary, but there's a lot of folks that helped out in this, and I won't go through all the folks there, but we have folks from USGS and Parks and Wildlife and Fish and Wildlife and a lot of staff at Parks and Open Space that came out to help us early in the morning check our traps for Prebles.
Good. Hey, thank you, Tim. Because of time, I'm going to go through the staff POSAC and see if there's any questions for Tim. If you stick around a few minutes, thanks for coming out tonight. So, Paula, I'll start with you this time, please. Any questions?
No, just comment that really excellent work, Tim, and I'm very happy to see the rebound in populations and that they weren't all wiped out. That's wonderful news.
Great. Thank you. Trace? No. Kira?
I'm muting.
Oh, I'm sorry, Trace, sorry.
But anyway, good work and no comment.
Okay, Kira?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Scott?
No questions.
Anne?
Nothing from me. Thank you.
Heather?
Just thank you for the update. It's so nice to see the populations rebounding. So thanks again.
Yeah. Jen?
No comment, just a thank you to Tim and your staff for all your hard work on this.
Thank you. And do we have any online comments?
We have no online comments on this.
Thank you, V. Since it's not an action item and information only, I will consider the item closed. And now we will move to the highlight of the evening, live from Longmont, Colorado, the director's update.
Hi, Jim. Thank you. So we'll make this brief. Not that much to report. We've had our hands full with the crowds. Couple things. One, the community in the mountain communities will be happy to know that the forestry sort yards are going to be reopening. The Nederland Community Forestry Sort Yard is going to open this Wednesday, June 3rd. And then the Meeker Sort Yard over by Allens Park will open 2 weeks later. And I think most of you know, but for those of you who don't, these facilities are really important resources for the mountain communities to take material from wildfire mitigation efforts. And it also helps us reduce the county's waste stream. On the numbers side, last month I shared with you that our trails have seen record numbers of visitors, and that's kind of anecdotal. Everybody has been experiencing this, and we appreciate the fact that folks are finding refuge there, I guess you might say, during the whole pandemic. People are finding great value in getting out. And tonight I have a few figures to actually quantify based on our April numbers. Batasso has seen doubled visitation over similar timeframes. Carolyn Holmberg Preserve at Rock Creek Farm has seen tripled visitation. And overall, for all of our units, we've seen a 36% increase in visitors comparing April 2019 to April 2020. So lots of folks are out. We welcome them. It's been a challenge for many of our staff, and we've had to do a lot more coordination and collaboration with the Sheriff's Office, with Public Works, who are the transportation folks, as well as partners like City of Boulder, Open Space and Mountain Parks, where we share landscape at like Flagstaff and Walker Ranch. So it's been a challenge, but we've been rising to meet that challenge. And it's been a process of fine tuning over the last couple months to get better and better. We still have some trouble spots, and those have our full attention. So we hope to be putting some additional practices in place that might help keep the crowds well organized and the chaos to a minimum. Lastly, just as a kind of fun thing, because this is a nice piece of news to take us away from how busy we've been working with visitors, and that is that the Building and Historic Preservation team recently completed converting their new tool trailer into a solar-powered mobile woodshop. And I've got a couple pictures for you so you can get an idea of what we're talking about here. Here it is. Oops, I got to share, sorry. Share. There we go. Hopefully this has popped up. Can you all see that? Yep, good. So forget the big solar panel right in front of you. That's a light up sign thingy. But the white trailer right there that says 17731's got freshly mounted solar panels on top.
Ooh.
And if I can also shift, oh, actually, let me see if I can just scroll down. Here we go. And here it is in action. Recently, just a couple weeks ago, when they were redecking the boardwalk over here. So let me just unshare momentarily. Share, there we go. The beauty of this thing is that it's quieter. So a lot of credit for this goes to Mike Lohr for designing and building it, but the beauty is that all the power tools they need are now running without the constant hum of a large gas generator, which annoys them, annoys the wildlife, annoys the public. So I just want to do a shout out to that team for their thoughtful and inventive innovation that allows them to work on field construction projects now using 100% clean energy. So that's my fun fact for the evening. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain them.
Hey, Eric, Jim, I just have one real quick and we'll open it up. Are you back in the office at all? Are you doing the 50% stuff? Where's the county at as far as getting back for you guys and also for us as POSAC members? Or do we need to get a Zoom booster shot? In other words, are we
Yeah, well, I think we all need a Zoom booster shot. Yeah, so so on June 1st, which is Monday, the county will basically begin tier 2 changes. So the county is tiered all of its operations into tiers 1 through 4. And tier 1 are the sort of things that never stopped, like police services, anything that was required statutorily that could not be put off. So there's any number of services that the county provides across the board that require in-person handling. And so tier 1, those are the things that never stopped. Tier 4 would be us and me, folks who can work effectively remotely and whose productivity really isn't diminished. And in fact, there's certainly cases where some of our staff feel like their productivity is improved. Tiers 2 and 3 are kind of that middle ground where they are services that the county provides traditionally in person. Some are more important than others. That would be tier 2. Others are things that can wait a bit longer and there's no pressing need to rush back into them. That's tier 3. So we've been doing tier 1 for the last 2 months. Tier 2 will kick into gear on June 1st. And that does include things like the community sort yards where we had to work out a safety protocol. Those are services that have to be done in person, obviously, and providing the sort yards as a place for people to take their wildfire mitigation materials is important. So we are in a very structured process on a monthly basis to make decisions about how we can open up more tier 2, more tier 3, and at some point in the future, but no rush, certainly tier 4. So our facilities, some county facilities will be reopening to the public in limited capacity on June 1st, Monday. Our building, Parks and Open Space, will remain closed to the public because face it, we don't see that many visitors. Most of our partners and stakeholders we can have this kind of constructive meeting with, and there's no real need to get together in person. And I think that that'll probably remain the way it is for the foreseeable future. Some staff will have more access on a limited basis to the building to facilitate their productivity. An example would be, as somebody pointed out earlier, it's hard to do GIS at home. If you can't sink into the system in person, it's been a challenge. And while IT has been phenomenal at troubleshooting and trying to create solutions that make everybody's lives better, some things, there's no place like home. So we're going to slowly and carefully and safely transition to more tier 2 and tier 3 activities happening.
Eric, let me ask you this, maybe it's a better way to put it.
Yep.
When would we get a chance to meet Ann in person?
Right.
Was that meeting?
That's a great question. I'm not sure where advisory boards fall, if it's tier 3 or tier 4 off the top of my head. I would say that we're likely to continue to do this for several more months, simply because there's no reason we can't be more or less effective in this format.
Okay.
The problem with you all is that you're a large group and we can't socially distance you on the dais, which is a bit of a challenge. And this is probably more conducive to the public being able to see all of you and have a constructive conversation than trying to figure out how to manage you on the dais and not on the dais and manage us and have debates about, well, how big a crowd are we going to get? So for now, this is our world.
Okay.
And I would encourage the public, if they have comments on how they think we can make this more effective and create better opportunity for engagement, the county is all ears, and we are certainly working with every technology that we can, including trying to adopt some new ones.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I'll turn it over to the other POSAC members have questions.
I have one for Eric. So you talked about visitation being up. I was on Rabbit Mountain last week and there was an emergency response up there. I'm wondering if that's increased tremendously across the board as well, because I mean that's got to take a huge amount of time for you guys, and you know things happen.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't honestly know the stats, but I would say this: there's from the very get-go, we have tried to message to the public, recreate closer to home. don't put yourselves at risk. Don't put EMTs and law enforcement and our rangers at risk, because things can happen. And with some of the crowds that we've seen at places up like Hesse and going access through Eldora, et cetera, we've had to really manage those situations more carefully so that if emergency services are needed, they can get in, residents can get out. And we have had difficulty in places like Flagstaff, Hesse, and a few other places where we've had to have more overtime, sheriff's deputies, more of our staff redeployed to just try to maintain order. So we have messaged consistently, and will continue to do so, that we really need people to follow all of the precautions. Boulder County, whether you're indoors or outdoors, has a mask order. So you've got to have one with you at the trailheads. And when you're on the trail, you don't have to wear it, but if you come within 6 feet or get close to somebody, you really should be putting that mask back on. We've had to message expectations. If you want to go to a place like Walker, you better get there before 8 a.m. because the parking lots are filling up fast. I think places like Rabbit, we've had some very effective, fairly simple solutions on restricting parking along the county road for public safety. But Rabbit's the kind of park that our parking lot isn't big enough from the standpoint that the Rabbit can easily hold safely many more people than can fit in the parking lot. It's very popular. It's one of my favorite places. So people can park along the county road, but we have closed parking, at least temporarily, in the areas that give law enforcement and the public concern about too much parking on both sides of the road and near the curve. So people keep coming, and I think a place like Rabbit can absorb it. But places like Annie White, they can't absorb that, and we're really looking at some parking solutions that will work better for the carrying capacity of that park as well as the neighbors. So we're not out of the woods yet, but I think that the silver lining on this is it is causing us to look much more rapidly at the problems that I think we'll see as the population continues to grow and people want more access. We're seeing what that's going to look like, and it's giving us the opportunity to think much more proactively about what changes we can make to resolve some of those things.
Okay. Any
Thank
others?
you. Hey, Eric, do you think that the opening of Rocky Mountain National Park on the 4th is going to provide a bit of a pressure release valve for open space?
I sure hope so. I do think it will. We've seen really large numbers of people who are going up into the mountains to places like Hesse and Mud Lake and all that kind of thing. And I am hopeful that opening up that landscape to public access is going to take some pressure off, because it's just going to give a bigger place for the crowds to sort of diffuse into. So that's certainly hopeful.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Jim.
The May 28th POSAC meeting is now adjourned, and we'll see you all next month. Thank you.